Okay. This is WNDC. WNDC. NDC. WNDC stands for We in the Crib and You Ain't. Technically speaking, it's a concept of me just giving you an alternative to many of the things that you're, accustomed to. And yeah. So this one here is going to be a little more fun. I'm trying to get my head around making sure that I get this out, being that I'm live, right here. So peep where I'm going with this. All right. I come from parents that were very active in the civil rights movement during the same exact era that this film was scripted around. That same 1965, 6, 7, 8, and to 70, 74-ish. And for me, it's been a part of my my current cross to bear. And it means it's Black History Month. And I made a point of following a lot of posts and reviews on this movie, Judas and the Black Messiah. And I really honestly took note of a lot of the sentiment, as well as where it actually came from. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the people that had very avid views about certain aspects of the movie itself all had in common the mere fact that most of these people did not live at a state of vivid recollection of that era. And for me, I was right there in it. And this movie gave me a lot of flashbacks, because I wasn't looking at the movie because of the Judas or the Messiah, more so than the concept of the era that they were painting in such a manner that, just due to the mere fact that I was one of those kids just young enough to not necessarily get into all the other things that were going on, but not old enough to get into some of the other things that that have caused many people to express how, if you were living during the 60s and the 70s, then you shouldn't remember the 60s and the 70s. Personally, I can see where they came from, because a lot happened in this small amount of time to be so much of a part of our history as Americans, as people of color. And in the process of it, here I am watching this movie, and I'm going through a lot of conflicts, because I prepared myself for all of the other reviews of, oh man, that guy, why is it that they always keep getting these English actors to portray black folks, and why, they had this, man, I didn't tell the good parts about dude, and, more than it was a story about this. And, I get it. The first thing that I get more than anything else is that this movie was about Judas. It wasn't about the guy Judas. It was about the fact that kind of existence of people who were rather, and how there were so many Judas's, people who were employed to basically, to intercept and inform and, and instigate whatever else on many different platforms during that era in our culture or society. It's not just, the bad guys against the good guys. Technically speaking, during that era, we had people like, like Hoover and all these other people, and Lyndon B. Johnson and all these other people like that, and these Dixiecrats. And, we were going through an era where, a lot of our forefathers or whatnot, empowered these people to believe that they had to, defend and protect. And one of the things that stood out the most early on in the movie was a point in the movie where the director of the FBI in the scene asked the other agent, that was under him, you gotta, how's your kids? And then he said, well, you got a little daughter. So how would you feel if your daughter came home with a black guy? Now, why I point these things out is because while a lot of people were looking for the pro this, that, the other thing, because they really studied the people and whatnot, and they wanted people to know all of that, they missed the theatrical messages that were being described in this film, this movie, this script of sorts. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of people who can lose sight of the artistry, the theatrical message being offered more so than the particulars of, who this should have been about and why they didn't talk about this and why they didn't talk about that. And I get it. Because the same story that you saw that was going on in, in that movie in Chicago and Detroit, during these little eras or something, was going on in a lot of the places. It was going on in Jersey. It was going on in Compton. It was going on in Watts. It was going on in Dallas, and it was going on in Arkansas. It was going on, and even in Georgia, it was going on all over the country where people of color were, contemplating how far into the struggle they needed to go. But, the mere fact that it was that era where these things were relevant. And I think in a lot of cases, one of the biggest problems that we had, or one of the biggest problems that I think a lot of people today are having while watching that, is that, there's a big gap in reality when people, who are suffering from some form of, post-traumatic slave syndrome, as Dr. DeGraw has, explained it, which is natural. It's as natural as what the Jews are going through or profess to go through with the Holocaust. We, have a genetic kind of instinct of the passionate punishment that we've ensued in our evolution, and emancipation. And I think in this case, it's really difficult for a lot of non-people of color to really see this because they've been accustomed, just as many people of color have been accustomed, to believe that things are just black and white. And I remember having this conversation with somebody just the other day. I talked about how, many people of color, are so traumatized by this, this struggle that we've been having, that in a lot of cases, they're not capable of identifying exactly who are the oppressors, and then, and not just all of you are, in the same boat because you're white, because you're, a bigot. Just because they're a bigot don't make them racist. That just makes them a bigot. And it's hard to tell these understandings because it's so instinctually, it's so instinctually intense. Like I can't stand white people. I can't stand black people. I can't stand this, that, and the other. And one of the bigger problems with that struggle is the mere fact that, Chris Rock said it best when he used to say, white folks, they hate niggas. He says, when black folks, they hate niggas. That's the one thing that they have in common, and yet the image or the instinct or the definition of what we believe to be niggas was so sharp in those days because it was rather the haves or the have-nots. When they emancipated every person on this planet, it was after they had success in emancipating Washingtonians. Now, for a lot of people who don't know much about their own history, they would not really quite get the brilliance in the first act of emancipation, when Washingtonians, all Washingtonians, and they were majority people of color. And please understand that even though we're in the nation's capital, there is an embassy for every type of color and race of people, and from where they come and a region and the origin, but black folks. Because black has been a unifying kind of way of just saying, yeah, black and white. And a lot of cases, many white people out there are struggling with just the mere fact that there are so many people who hate white folks that they're not even sure how to identify them and unaware how there are many people of non-color who are not very comfortable with being lobbed in with some of these particular people of non-color, that they really don't have views and agreements with as well. This movie really brought a lot of attention to an instinct of what was going on. It had nothing to do with the characters. It had everything to do with the process, the script, the fact that at that particular time there were still people. I call it the big black fear and the power of Mr. Charlie. We were, the 50s, 60s, and 70s into the 80s were the last days that we were in a actual, forceful control or manipulation of a certain caliber of people who strictly had a certain kind of, intent, a certain kind of rule or that they had for these particular type of people, and we're still dealing with this black and white things of that nature. For Americans, it gets so deep it goes all the way back to just the mere reason that due to our Constitution, it's made us being able to emancipate ourselves so much more difficult because the stipulations that they had for this one drop rule and this less than human aspect of people of color was more so under the rule of just the people that we got, not the other people that came in, and that's where that Prince Hall kind of twist comes in, but that's for another story. Judas and the Great Messiah. These stories, I watched an earlier movie that had somewhat of the same principle, and it offered the same principle. What stands out about this movie or this, this script or whatnot is the mere fact that there's a book out there called We Will Return in the Whirlwind. It's just, by Maxwell Sanford. It talks about the civil rights movement in the upper Northeast, on the East Coast, from Chicago and Pittsburgh and New York and Jersey, up in that area during the same time and era that Martin Luther King and everybody was doing their thing down south. Now, for many people who hear or study or follow or try to learn about the civil rights movement, in most cases, they get so pigeonholed into the I have a dream version of this thing that they don't see how these things were. They don't see how this is the same era that Adam Clayton Powell was one of the most gangster people on the hill in our country. He was doing more positive things, but he was from Harlem and the whole nine, and and he was worthy of being more revered, had it been for the mere fact that a lot of what happened to him happened during that same era as well. And due to the mere fact that there were lots of Judases that were into, and it was the fall of a lot of the things that we believed were good things to start with, or good things to happen, or good things to respect. We all were fighting for the same kind of unity, this same kind of desire to be, proud to be an American, and I looked at this movie, keeping in mind how so many people had so many different reviews of so many expectations that they had for this movie. And what I got out of it more than anything else is the mere fact that that this movie wasn't like the story of Malcolm X. It was by Spike Lee. It was the story of an era, and it really showed the subtle character of law enforcement, and it also showed the passion and the sense of volatileness, the innocence, the ability to be actually infiltrated on so many different levels in our own communities, just due to the mere fact that, even though we were all down for this, that, and the other, we were also had a job to do. And what really stood out the most about this movie is people think it was about the Messiah, and it wasn't about the Messiah. It was about Judas. It was about Judas, so artistically done that even from the real story itself, which they actually go and they show, and then they write the little scripts at the end of the movie, how the real Judas, was interviewed again after the fact and was asked, well, how would you like to be remembered and whatnot? And basically, he felt the need to just say, let the people see it for themselves and let them judge for it. And then it talks about in a little, the script at the end of the movie, it talks about how not too long after he had that coming to Jesus moment on film and recording in real time with him in a little blue suit, the whole nine, sitting there, after knowing all of this stuff, after his story has been told right before you in a way that most people were too doggone adamant about it being a British actor, or it being not really that positive, and painting the picture of these positive things that our power to the people movement and whatnot also had for all the people that are not going to do it. It was about the Judas element, and the mere fact that what was so deep about this whole thing is, while people would think, oh man, Judas is the bad guy, kind of like we used to, we were conditioned to believe that, Uncle Tom was a bad guy, until some of us woke up and actually read, the actual stories and the autobiography of the real, Uncle Tom, and realized that that's a slander. It's something that how did we get duped into not believing that, even though we might have thought and have been conditioned to believe that this Uncle Tom instinct was a negative thing, a turncoat, a snitch, of this, that, and the other. And here yet again is a story of Judas that mirrored the same story of Jesus, the Messiah, and his Judas, and in the same kind of mindset, in a certain kind of way. It played out in a manner where, as I sit here today and I watch this movie and its partake of it and whatnot, and knowing the story of this Judas, and also knowing about this Mr. Hampton and whatnot, I get it. In the same manner of how they may make Malcolm X or a Nation of Islam movie in the same kind of manner, and then, but it also talks about the Judases and the people who shot Malcolm, and how some of them, the guy that was arrested and got out and this, that, and the other, and all this other stuff, and how each one of these people within these organizations that, while many of us want to still just talk about the good in every one of these things, there were a lot of other power plays that always continued to be there, no more than it was back on the plantations when we had, we thought the Uncle Toms were bad and it was the Sambos, but the Sambos were also overseers and, and some other things, but we've always had people who actually had a job, kind of like how we would have the no snitch policy, for people of color. But at the same time, we have people of color who are on the other side of law enforcement that just wish that people would just basically, if you want to stop all of this, you just snitch. And it's a power play that I see that existed in a way that, I sit back and I look at that movie, and I have to say that due to the mere fact that I get it, I think that they did a good enough job for many of these people who don't have a emotional instinct towards the expectations of how they want many of their positive influences, leaders, elders, heroes, or anything of that nature being portrayed, but see this in more of the theatrical message that came about, because what was most important about this whole movie was the mere fact that that's the way it was there at that time, no matter how you might think it was for everybody else somewhere else. And yet, what was most important about there is so many things that involve that. How many of the gangs and how many of the people and how the Rainbow Coalition, a lot of people, a lot of pro-black wannabe militant people really missed the mere fact that many of these militant people from back in that era, who were so power to the people, were power to all people, because this was a thing about all people. And we missed this when it went to, I'm just talking about my people. If we don't, and this is a thing that we've got, this seems to be the problem with America. We've gotten so into our own high schoolism, as Martin said, the drum major instinct, the desire to be first, the desire to lead the parade. And while it's a good instinct, let us not get it confused. And that's the message that seems to come from where this movie just captured a stigma, a reality of that era. Now we're talking no cell phones, no TV, no beepers, no, lots of things that we fail to understand that these people existed with, just merely on the mere fact that that's the technology they had available. And yet, there were many portions of this movie that also tickled me, like the point when he came back out of jail and he was up there and there were drummers. Now, me being also a percussionist and whatnot, I found it funny because out of everything else that was really bugging me about this movie, I also think like a stagehand. But in that process, I heard the drums, and the drums were tight, and you could tell these drummers play drums. They understand percussion, but somebody who was on the shaker, even when they started back up again and wanted to get their thing, that was an actor. That was somebody that probably got into the movie and they were like, you know, we got to find a place for you. Oh, I got a shaker. Oh, yeah, good. We'll put you over there with the drummers. Because, yeah, I really had a, you know, a bee in my bonnet about hearing the shakers, you know, being totally not involved into the rhythm, the percussion of that, how tight that could have been had that been an actual, you know, person who knows how to use a shaker, you know, when it drums and you're instigating, you know, a chant or whatnot. That's the funny part. So the thing here that I'm getting from this whole thing was the mere fact that while we talk about all the people who lived and died for the revolution, when we talked about all the people who fought, shed blood for our freedoms that we now today, you know, sometimes are not grateful for the respect that we've been asking and fighting for, that while we still don't believe that it's over, it's done regionally or whatnot. The mere fact happens is that we've come a long way from 1915. We've come a long way from 1813. We've come a long way from 1776. And yet here we are. And until we really get it correct this time, you know, and in a lot of cases, a lot of the reasons why so many of the masses are incapable of getting it is because of things like the reviews that I read prior to watching this movie, and how it really gave me such a, you know, thing that I really didn't want to pay for the movie. I didn't want to put a dime in there, and I'm with IATSE. My bug is on every movie at the bottom and the credits and this, that, and the other. And, you know, you think you want to support that and your people and all this other stuff. But, you know, the reviews put me into such a mindset that I didn't feel comfortable giving these people a dime. And therefore, I found a way of watching it in its completion without. And what also came from that is just the mere fact that in watching the movie, as I watched the movie, at some point, all of the perspectives of all of these other naysayers and people who, you know, all had an opinion on how the movie should have been scripted and made and this, that, and the other in their own mindset, and how certain things, you know, just felt wrong for them. And I watched that movie, and what happened for me is at a point I got into the movie because I was there. I was there, and I was old enough to see my parents, you know, getting beat and thrown in doggone paddy wagons, and, you know, and literally listening to, you know, the explosions when, you know, when somebody blew up the only black grocery store in Pittsburgh. Watching the news when there was a special report because they were dragging my uncle and my dad off the roof of our bookstore and community center in Homewood because the police and the fire department, you know, literally shot and cut my pops and them. They didn't just go to jail. When they came home in crutches and things like that. And that wasn't the end of their struggle, you know, and watching them go back out there again, you know. Let me fix this music. You hold on. Okay. All right. I'm back. And I really need to try to get this out of my head and the manner into which I see it in my mind, because it was vivid there. I mean, all the way down to the smells back when we didn't have deodorant like that, when people didn't have the hygiene that we had back then, when you was funky, right on, but we loved harder. It was more genuine in their need to look out for us. There were, in the standards that we live in today, those things were for rich people, in comparison to where we're at today. And it's really hard to tell a lot of people who are struggling with their own sense of post-traumatic slave syndrome, because it's genetic and they still got it, but they don't get it as much as I got it, because I was there. And as I'm sitting here fresh from having watched that, and remembering the many images of how my parents, were so involved in their own struggle, just like that I could see, the connection, and how, the girl that, got with the guy and then got pregnant and was worried about, but you're gonna die, and this, that, the other, and realizing that lots of people left a lot of us as they gave it all they got to get us where we're at. And in a lot of cases, a lot of us today might see these people in a manner of, but you left me, you didn't do this, that, the other. And that's not the truth either, because in many of the genetics of who a lot of these people who live today, they'll never know the story of how influential both the Messiah and Judas have been in our struggle to get to where we're at. And I know that might not sound fair to a lot of people, but I don't see nobody still getting, up in their feelings about the mere fact that they wiped out a whole couple of blocks for a move in Philly. I don't see them doing that for a lot of things that happen in Jersey or New York or a lot of these other places in LA, these things like that. And so we can call ourselves, power to the people, or red, black, and green, or this, that, and other, but you can't really understand how everything got us to where we're at. And in some cases, we seem to struggle with how we were told the bits and pieces of how things happened back then. And understand that if we were who we are today, with the people who were instrumental in starting this back in those days, we would have had no problem with being something else totally as a planet, as a country, right then. If we could have taken everything that we've got today and given it to all those people back then, we would be, the whole country, in a whole better place than we are right now, trying to figure out why are we still feeling this need to believe that the struggle is still there and the revolution is right here and Black Lives Matter and Make America Great and all these other things, but at the same time, we can't own every bit of our own. Not just our Messiahs, but our Judases, in the same light of purpose. And I know that sounds kind of awkward and weird, but trust and believe there are power plays of this that exist in every little bit of our world and the world around it. There are many people who have to go to work every day and decide, do 150,000 of our people die, or do we let 3.8 million people in the world die? Well, that's okay. Save the world, spare our people, sacrifice our people. There's an odd saying. I think I might have started it. You know, there's a reason why the Creator created man, humans, Homo sapiens, to be biodegradable. And so, in theory, even when we believe there to be a loss, the only loss is to actually lose the occupation of our genetics off of this globe, because we rise again, and all that we are, we, you know, to ashes, to dust, to back to the baby, to this year, and then all of a sudden it goes to the old guy, and then, you know, an old acquaintance be forgotten. We evolve as we evolve. The next move for many of us are Star Trek. We've done a lot of the other things that couldn't be happening. Keep in mind that in 2021 that we live in right now, we are now on the cusp where the next level for most of the random, insignificant people who aren't boldly going where no man has gone before, could be, you know, another portion in the script to the old movie Soylent Green, you know, because that actually takes place in 2022. And a lot of those old time movies and this, that, and the other, you know, I mean, even like the Jetsons and whatnot, there's lots of things that we've gotten accomplished in just some of the jokey jokes. I mean, the Simpsons thing where, you know, you sit back and you go, oh my God, this is the Simpsons theory, is this and the other. And yes, there's a lot of similarities in how we are living these coinky dinks right now, of things that were bits and pieces of parts of things that people, you know, had intense emotional opinions about. This goes all the way back to Nostradamus, who said that, you know, this era that we're living in right now was so undefinable, you know, that they were known to be at that point where when they got to that point, they went into a full state of hysteria. They went crazy, you know, because, and I get it today, just like I got this movie because, you know, for Nostradamus, he couldn't see how Facebook and YouTube and the great World Wide Web and cell phones and smartphones and the ability for us to connect in the matrix on a one-to-one basis completely around the total planet without causing global hysteria. And the mere fact that we're now in a state where we are no longer expected to just support this type of person or that kind of person or this, that, and the other. We don't sit back anymore and believe that, you know, that we're the princess or the prince. You know, we don't, you know, even when you want to say you're kings and queens, you still have to have a court. You still have to have a kingdom that has to exist in something. And so in many cases, people seek too much into the royalty of being one or the other and not necessarily, you know, find themselves more interested in seeing the purpose of it all, the yin yang of our progression. And in that, I came into this movie with the expectations, especially by way of how the reviews were reading, you know, that there wasn't enough about Mr. Hamilton. And I think in this case, in this movie, for this reason, that they put it in like they did it right in this one, yeah, I think it was enough. I think it gave you just enough that if you're really into the story, you would have went back and read it. But the most important thing wasn't about him. It's about Judas. And how there were many Judases. There were more Judases than there were Messiahs in our community. And they weren't bad people. They were people who did what they did because they were employed by people who wanted them to have a control of what we were trying to do. And just like in a story of Jesus, the one thing that even Jesus wished that he could have done better was to prevent Judas from killing himself. Because that's the only sin that God had about, or the Creator had about your life and your purpose. Give up. If you give up, go ahead. But you know, if you give up, then you know, all right. And in a lot of cases, it's not just about, the good or the bad in this, because I look at these things and then I look at this movie and then I look at the original guy who was the Judas in the movie that, is being interviewed, then killed himself not too long after there. And I thought about the mere fact that after that was over, after he got his gas station, after he lived this other life and became an actual agent or this, that, and after a lot of those things, we still lived a lot of years. And I remember those years. I remember this bicentennial was a point in time that shook the whole conscience of our communities to a point where we went from power to the people and all these other things. And, we shall overcome and this, that, and the other to the bicentennial Negro. And we went from there into disco. Then next thing you know, hip hop come along and so did crack. And crack killed Applejack. And he can't come back. And nobody knows why Applejack was so important in the first place. But love me some Applejacks. And then came the 90s, and we're in the 2000s to a point where for a lot of us who have lived as long enough to remember the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there are adults that we live around today that have no capability of being able to imagine how it was enough to get the lyrics of Prince 2000 party over. Oops, out of time. But tonight, I'm sitting here and I'm talking about how they partied in 1968 during the era that this movie was made, and how it felt to be the child of the parents that were in this fight fully, understanding how it was for you to know when the cops are coming. Want a brother, want a friend. Understanding how it was to see your parents stuck in an environment where at that moment, it's probably best for you to comply, even if this is not going to turn out respectful to you. And you're sitting there and you're out somewhere and ain't nobody else around but you and somebody that wants to act or enforce their superiority on you. And now we're in a whole different state in the world now. Now we can go online and film and this, that, and the other. But, for the people who are sitting back and going, I'm going to manipulate, take advantage of you because you seem to be in a hard kind of way. And, and if you're lucky, you might get a gas station out of it. And while that might not seem like much, how many brothers do you know own a gas station that they got in 1968, 69, and still got it today? Watching this movie and realizing that as they were, unifying, a lot of what was also not clear to a lot of people who believe that the law enforcement or whatnot, the government and everybody was trying to stop these people from liberating themselves, but because now that we know the truth, now that we know how it felt to live between 1969 all the way to 2021, and the many generations of pain and suffering that came by way of watching our communities and our culture and our customs be manipulated and mangled, and most people can't even recall how crack changed everything, and yet there was coke all the way from the 50s and 60s and the 40s and this, that, and the other. It's not ever been totally exterminated off the planet because it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. No, it's not for human and everyone else's consumption to the point where it was at the time that it did what it did to a certain degree, that we had Iran Contras and Oliver Norths and all these other things that all talk about that. We had the Enrons and the SNL scandals and all this other stuff that literally risked and sold its soul once again in a certain kind of manner that when they tell the story years from here of those eras, it will be in the same Jesus and Messiah manner if we're lucky enough for you to understand that the artistry was not about the Messiah. It was about the Judas. Not because the Judas is a turncoat, but because there's somebody out there willing to pay somebody who needs something to survive, willing to pay you to go mess up your own movement. And without even letting you know just how messed up the movement was, so deeply that they put it right there in the movie where they said, man, you know, this guy that's going around, this, that, and the other, man, he's our best agent. You're going, wait a minute. I seen this dude. Wow, I never would have thought he was, or this, that, and the other. 2/3 of some of the things that people think were a part of what we were a part of were actually theatrics that were paid for in the same manner that this Judas and the Messiah painted in a way that the hardest part about that movie was releasing my knowledge of the people in play during that time and look at this from a theatrical standpoint, where the best that it did was to explain to a lot of people who can't really take in how it must have felt to watch that shootout, how it must have felt being on the other side of the barricade when they was having the shootout, burn up and this, that, and the, being in the bar, you know, being in your community. And, you know, as a kid, when, you know, you'd hear Uncle so-and-so or this, that, and the other was involved in something, this, that, and the other, and not necessarily even have an idea how theatrically intense things were going on to put us where we are today. While many people today struggle with just how they had to deal with them and their own demons and how they took them out on many of us as we were trying to grow up, wondering, why the hell are you so messed up in the head? And not understand. And then just like in the story of Jesus, I thought this is brilliant and sad. The key player in that movie, Judas, in the same fashion and form, was noted to have killed himself. What would that brother be going through that made a whole movie only to make a point that this brother we lost? And had he not killed himself, this movie could have been made in the same fashion. But boy, oh boy, I would have loved to have seen him pop up and go, you know, that wasn't really the way, you know, no, I was not only there, but let me show you what happened afterwards. You know, man, shoot. Well, how long? I want to know how long he had the gas station. I want to know what, you know, what happened to that community after, you know, people stop feeding everybody's kids, after people stop believing that, you know, you ain't gonna beat me no more, pig. You know, you're gonna respect me like you respect everybody else. You know, we're still suffering from that in pockets all over our society. Some of the things that happen in places like, you know, Ferguson and, you know, in LA and other things like that won't even happen here in DC. You know, we don't play that. And they haven't played that since they emancipated all Washingtonians first. And then they said, hey, this is a great idea. Let's do it. Give them all of that. And they tried that. They gave them all of that. And 2.5 years later, they had to go all the way to Texas to go, hey, man, did you hear them? And yet most of the people that we have out here, a lot of the people that were, leaving, comments about how they felt their Black history should be portrayed out here, are on that time. They're 2.5 years out of a reality that really came from a more theatrical things. Yes, it's not perfect, but boy, oh boy, are we so far ahead of what we were fighting for and dying for in 1968. And I felt like, this right here, if nothing else, is worth me putting this out as it is. And so this is WNDC, NDC. And I'm Amps Are Easy, Hafiz. A child born into the civil rights movement that allowed me to be at 6, 7, 8 years old at the right time, that as I watch history being replayed in 2021, it gave me flashbacks that I saw in a whole different comparison than the reviews that people got from what they could only put in a 2-hour movie. I get it. Jesus, the Black Messiah. Nice film. It is what it is. You good?